So here we are, episode 14 of the Drop-In podcast, and we are joined by Darren Roberts. How's it going, man?
Yeah, good. It's nice to know I'm 14th choice. That's pretty inspiring. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I feel pretty privileged. Well, first of all, thanks for coming on, and thanks for inviting us into this. I don't even know how you describe it. Boudoir. We did Dan Paley's podcast in here, which was like before this one, and now we're here. How would you describe to people listening, if they were not watching the video version, what this place is?
It's the bedroom you wish you had when you were 12. That's pretty much, that was what I was going for in this place. It's the same carpet. I mean, obviously, maybe when you were 12, you didn't want a ski erg and a leg press and row in your bedroom. But apart from that, it's exactly, it's child's carpet, LEDs, flashing lights, lots of neon. And of course, there's a Pac-Man arcade game to play. And the whole back wall is a screen to be projected on, which is normally got films on. So, and of course, the obligatory Mario Kart gets projected onto that, and Xbox as well. So it's all the things you need to really hit someone's elite performance in here. So there's lots of comfy chairs.
Yeah, I guess this place will probably, as people will soon hear in the sort of next hour or so, will kind of realize that this place kind of symbolizes like everything you do in terms of like training, but probably recognizing that things need to be fun.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
Well.
Yeah, it's it's an adult playground. Don't know if that sounds different when you say it than it does in your head, but and that's my whole playground philosophy, which we'll probably talk about. Yeah,
so just to kind of give people an idea of what it is that you do and what you do here. How would you explain to someone who doesn't have a clue about what
question.
You do,
well
who you are,
Duncan.
and what your job is?
Who am I and what is my job? So obviously, you think I'd know the answers to this, wouldn't you? I'm not even sure what I do half the time. If I'm honest, I don't think anyone is. My job is to provide what I would call a concierge service to action sport athletes, from everything from medical to training, anything to do with them as an athlete. On the performance and medicine side, I provide that service. So, as soon as someone hits the deck and on the side of a mountain somewhere, and they ring me up, from that moment till them being back on the mountain 6 or 12 months later to do exactly the same thing again, that's my job. And there's a lot of wheels within that, and a lot of plates that have to be spun to get them back to that point where to do what they did in the first place, to ring me up. But it's not just the injury side; it's the whole training and physical preparation for action sports, which is I wouldn't say I've got a unique approach. We're all information brokers. It's just that how you physically prepare an action sport athlete is not how you would prepare what I call traditional sport athlete.
So you're talking about how you sort of specialise in action sports athletes, is more mainstream sort of sports side of things. Is that where you've essentially come from before you did this?
Yeah. So I cut my time in Premiership rugby and Super League rugby, and even did a season in Premiership football. And I only see action sport athletes. I specialise in action sport athletes, but my time in mainstream sport is more about what not to do rather than what to do with action sports. And it's again, I said the lessons learned for me in mainstream sport was what not to do in action sports. And I came from the military as well. And for the first few years, I had a very much sergeant major approach, which is great in rugby, not so great in action sports. So there had to be a massive shift in my outlook as to what I was doing and why I was doing it. Otherwise, I was going to get nowhere.
I can imagine it's just like, it must just literally be night and day between, those sort of mainstream sports as well as action sports. But I guess like from the outside looking in, it seems to be a lot of the stuff that you do is basically taking an action sports athlete who's maybe had a sort of catastrophic crash or injury and you're nursing them back to, or sort of putting that program together to nurse them back to health, how would yours, in terms of percentage wise, off the top of your head, how much of your time spent training an athlete for, say, elite performance in a contest or for a video compared to rehabbing them, basically?
Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So I spend the majority of my time doing memes about physios and national governing bodies. Actually, that's what I spend most of my time doing, putting them on blast. But when I'm not putting physios and governing bodies on blast via memes on social media, I do work with athletes, and I don't differentiate between injured and non-injured, and that sounds a bit flaky, but being injured is a pretty lonely, solitary path that an athlete has to follow. And action sport athletes, as I've said many, many times in many podcasts and many conferences, the line between brilliance and trauma is very, very thin. So it's either, as you well know yourself, it's high fives and fist bumps, or they don't get up. And it's great when it's high fives and fist bumps. It's not so great when they don't get up. And the not getting up part is usually season-ending, career-threatening, sometimes life-threatening injuries. So that path back to that sport can be pretty lonely. And what they don't need, what athletes don't need, is me wringing my hands and being a complete handbrake going, God, yeah, it's really shit, isn't it? It's like, no, yeah, obviously it is. Let's not make it any worse than it has to be. And just really, it's about what they can do. So as much as you may call it a rehabilitation process, as far as I'm concerned, it's just another phase of training. It just might not be quite what they would otherwise be doing were their leg not hanging off, but it's training nonetheless. And there's a lot that someone can do, even in their sport, which is, why I am where I am in this place. So I can get them back to doing stuff that's an action sport athlete as soon as possible, because no one wants to be stood in a room with nothing for company but an anatomical poster waving a rubber band around. Yeah. No one likes physio but physios. So there's got to be some soul, some life to it, and some community to it as well, which is why I always get them to work with other athletes regardless of injury. So whether you're injured or not, if you come in here on any other day and let's say there's a couple of what you would call injured athletes, a couple of non-injured athletes, they're all sort of doing the same stuff, bar maybe not that particular limb if it's injured. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's like, sure. So as soon as you start parceling it out into you're doing this or you're doing that, you're not injured, so you're going to do that, you're injured, you're going to do that, you're already creating this separation that you're making worse. They're already separated from the sport, the friends, the community. So don't make it any worse here, which is why as soon as you walk through the door, hopefully the athletes feel comfortable and feel at home that, one, I understand action sports, and two, that we're here to get them back. And it's not about the injury. It's like I keep saying, what can we do? What can we do? You might not be able to do the 360 whip that you want to do, but you can ride, just don't fall off. So I'm always getting them to do what they can do straight away. It just might not be what they want at the moment, but it's all a means to an end.
No, that's really interesting. It's like just had Dan Paley on the podcast, and he said a lot of things to that effect, where he's just kind of like, whereas if he was to go to hospital, and again, he wasn't wanting to take anything away from the NHS, what they do is amazing, but their sort of knee-jerk reaction is to basically tell him to stay off the bike, for example, whereas there's someone like yourself is probably because they just accept that he's going to go on his bike anyway. Sit down and say, well, you're going to ride your bike, so let's just make sure we kind of do it in the right way.
And there's again, when I'm putting physios on blast about this, it's this athlete must not do bodyweight squats, and I'll say, all right, okay, they can't do just themselves do a basic squat. No, they're not strong enough, or they've not got the right control. And I'll say, okay, so how do they have a shit then? Because they're going to have to get up and off a toilet. So, and how did they get out of the car, by the way, on the way here? There's a very rigid and strict approach to medicine and the biological healing and the injury process on one side of things. And then there's me taking a massive step back on the other side and going, well, if you can do ABC in everyday life, how does that relate to an activity that relates to your sport? And for Dan, rather than him doing some basic lunges and some static bike work, well, why don't you just ride around the park? More often than not, it isn't the activity that's a problem, it's the consequence of it going wrong. So Dan riding around the park, for example, is not a problem. Him trying to do something that he's not quite ready to do because he's not quite strong enough and falling and hurting himself, that's the problem. Yeah. And like I always say to all the athletes, no one hurts themselves. It's always when you fall off that's the problem. Yeah. So, and again, it's just relating everything back to the sport for all of them. Can you do this? Yes or no? Move on to the next bit. Can you do this? Yes or no? Move on to the next bit. But there's always something that you can do with them that involves them moving or doing something in their sport, which would otherwise be done what I call statically in a room with a rubber band, losing the will to live. And that's not going to get them back. And that's not going to get anyone back, I would argue. So it's always, and I've said about 7 times already, what can we do? What can you do? What can we do? Not what can't we do? What can we do?
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting when you think of somebody who's, whether they're a skateboarder or BMX or any extreme action sports athlete, it's like part of the reason they're good at what they do, that's pretty much the reason that they're not going to be able to do that's discipline training or traditional gym work or something.
It's one of the rules of, you're right. It's one of the principles of herding cats that I've got, is they are world class at what they do because they don't do as they're told. If they did as they were told, then they wouldn't be doing this as a sport, right? So, and again, it's just one of the many truths that you have to accept as anyone, as any sort of coach or practitioner working in action sports, is accept them for who they are, which is, as I say, they're world class at what they do because they don't do as they're told. They're autonomous, they're self-determined. They've done fine before they've got to me. You know, any athlete that I've worked with, I'm very, very lucky that they're all world class, and you know, they just happen to cross my path. They've done okay without me so far, so I'm just there, that little bit of a piece of a jigsaw to support them, but that success often comes in spite of rather than because of, and which is hard for maybe some coaches and practitioners to say, because we all like to think we're super mega important, and but we're not. You know, the athlete and the sport is the most important thing.
Yeah, it's funny how like it's almost one of the best assets it seems you can have is actually just realizing that you're not that important, and basically kind of dealing with it and recognizing it and moving forward from that.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the things. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but one of the paradigm shifts I had to have was telling them what to do doesn't work, and is it really that important anyway? You know, if they don't go to the gym 4 times a week, is the world going to stop turning, and will society as we know it collapse? Probably not. So again, it's back to what works, what doesn't, what's important, what's not, and finding those little gaps that they've got, which directly relates to the sport. Because otherwise, you know, training an action sport athlete like they're an Olympic sprinter doesn't work, because they're not an Olympic sprinter. So, which I know sounds obvious, but it's I don't smash them about doing squats, deadlifts, you know, really comprehensive directed strength and conditioning, because you could say it can work and it could affect their performance. I would argue that time spent in the gym doing that amount of work and not doing the sport itself is probably going to have a negative effect on the performance. And Matt Jones had a really good comment. We did a bit of a coaches summit a couple of years ago where a load of strength and conditioners and coaches from mainstream sport came, and we had all the Red Bull athletes there, and one of them said to Matt Jones as part of a Q&A, you know, don't you think you'd be that much better off if you physically prepared and trained and did this? And his answer was brilliant, which I 100% agree with, which is, yeah, I could do that, or I could be doing my actual sport and learning how to crash and how to tuck and roll and what happens when it goes wrong, and I'm not going to learn that in a gym. And he's not wrong. And I think as anyone that's just listening to this, that's a strength and conditioner or adult PE, as I call it, is, you know, we've really got to understand our place in the athlete's journey and where that sits and what it actually does or doesn't affect. there's plenty of world-class action sport athletes who have never been in the gym in their lives, and they will continue to be world-class athletes, and just be really conscious of whether we're slowing them down or speeding them up. And I'm always asking myself, am I the one? Am I the problem? Am I the roadblock to this athlete making any progress because of my limited map of the world? Which again comes back to when a physio or a doctor says to an athlete, well, you mustn't ride your bike or you mustn't go on your skateboard, but because that doesn't understand the whole continuum of what that means. You know, if someone can walk up and down stairs, what's the problem with them just sort of scooting around on a skateboard? I don't understand, you know. So it's I think I'm waffling a bit, but it all comes under the umbrella of understanding what works for them to get the best out of them.
Now, for sure, it's interesting you say about the gym stuff, because I'm like, there's action sports itself is such a wide spectrum of sports, and you do get people that are in the gym, your geatherons, or I'm sure Shauna Coxey's training for the Olympics, but then you've also got your Dan Paley's, Chris Kyle, who you've had through these doors. Do you often find that when you say get someone in here after an injury or something like that, that is literally the first time they've ever seen the inside of a gym?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's important for it to not look like a gym. And that's why, you know, for those that aren't watching this but are listening, why it doesn't look like a gym. Yeah. You know, when I first came here at this facility, they asked me if I wanted to build a gym in. I said absolutely not, because the majority of the athletes I see don't go to a gym and/or have never been in one, and it's you want to make it as familiar and as comfortable as possible. So it needs to look like action sports, smell like action sports, taste like it, sound like it's got to look like action sports. Hence why it looks like what my bedroom would have done when I was 12 if I had the resources to do so. So if it's not familiar to them and it's alien and then it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's just something that they've not seen before. So yeah, all the time I see athletes that they've never set foot in what you would call a gym. So they may not know how to squat and lunge, but I actually don't care, because I'm not here to make them good in the gym. And that's another thing for adult PE coaches that we have to be aware of is, are we actually making them better at the sport, or are we just making them good in the gym? You know, if someone needs strong legs, then that's why I've got a leg press, because I can spend hours teaching them how to squat beautifully, and that's great. But if they need strong legs, look, just use a leg press, get strong legs, and you'll figure it out from there. And you know, and that's all about working the adaptation rather than the exercise. But it's just making everything as simple as possible and as relatable to the sport as possible. So again, to use Dan as an example, because he's the one that's in at the minute, you know, he will do what's called his knee to wall test. He will do all his mobility work and warm up. He might not call it that, and he might not see it as that, because it's what I call broccoli that I've hidden on the plate. But this is all for him to go riding. So, and his knee to wall will determine what riding he can do that day. And if he goes beyond what his ankle's capable of, then it means he has to stop riding for that day because it'll hurt or it'll pinch. So it's all related directly to what he can do. So it's there for everything I do with him is, so if we do this, then you can do this. Otherwise it just turns into this really negative, can't do. And, you know, physios love to tell you what you can't do, not so much what you can. Yeah,
it's interesting what you say about like with Dan and stuff, and it's like, you should probably mention the fact that there's also a skate park outside the gym stroke boudoir. It sounds really interesting when you're talking about making it fun and making it relatable, but at the same time, when it comes to an injury especially, there must still come a point where the best thing for those athletes is to still do some gym work, do rehab work they're not used to. How hard is it to still kind of get that motivation through to such sort of like free-spirited individuals?
I think it's how. Do you know? I'm not actually sure that they do need to go to a gym. So there's probably, you know, strength and conditioners or anyone involved in fitness right now, probably, you know, smashing whatever it is they're listening to this album, me saying something like that. it's not that they need to go to a gym. It's not that they need to sort of follow some really, really complicated or directed program. It's just what is it that they need to do precisely? Because if someone's naturally fit and naturally strong, then how much fitness or strength work do they really need to do? And I think my advice to any action sport athlete would be find out what your gaps are, your strengths and weaknesses. And the strengths you probably don't need to work on, and your weaknesses, your little gaps, are things that you need to be aware of. And it's not that it's going to make you better at your sport the next day or at the weekend. You're not going to be more or less likely to win an event or a competition. But what it will allow you to do is this sport for much, much longer. And it just creates a bit of longevity into what they do. And there's no such thing as injury prevention in action sports, because you are going to get injured, but it can help you be more robust, less prone, and come back from injury that little bit quicker. So if you dress it, or not dress it, if you position and pitch it right to the athletes, and they understand where any kind of physical preparation sits within how it helps them in their sport, you don't really have a trouble doing it. And there's a lot someone can do with their body weight in an empty room, to prepare. But don't forget the sport itself. I use motocross as a training tool for non-motocross athletes because it's so difficult. Mountain biking for non-mountain bike athletes, skateboarding for surfboarders, surfing for skateboarders, snowboarding for anyone. There's lots of ways to get a preparatory adaptation into an athlete that doesn't necessarily involve standing in a gym squatting. But if they want to stand in a gym squatting, that's great, and I'll show them how to do that, and this is how it fits. So, your question was how difficult is it to get them into the gym after they've been injured, or should they?
Or gym, or any sort of like structured exercise or physio that still does require to basically help them get over whatever their respective injury is.
And so it's exactly that. It's got to be, and I'll repeat myself, directly relatable to the sport. Yeah. Like, why am I doing this? There's got to be a fundamental why. Otherwise, we're just doing something for the sake of doing it. We're just training for the sake of training because, I'm a strength and conditioner by trade, and this is what I do, and so let's do that. Then it's got to be. If it's not making them better at what they do or able to continue doing what they do, we don't do it. It's a waste of time.
Another thing, I suppose, which is probably just as crucial to the physical side of things, if not more so, especially when you have an athlete coming in off the back of a catastrophic injury, is the psychological side of things. How important do you see that side of things, and what would your sort of role be in not just only getting them back to physical health, but actually getting their confidence back up too, because it's only going to naturally have taken a knock?
Yeah, I think action sport athletes are pretty robust by nature of being an action sport athlete, and because the whole, unlike a mainstream sport athlete, action sport athletes, their whole life and community revolves around the sport itself. So when they're out of the sport, it's not just that they can't compete or take part or be in the sport. It's like they're removed from everything. The sport carries on. So the circus just carries on trolling around the country and trolling around the world, and they're not with it. So their friends, the support networks, family sometimes, the sport carries on, but they don't. So it's not difficult to motivate an action sport athlete to want them to get back to their sport, because their sport is their life and it's their community and it's their whole sort of sense of self. So the when it gets to what I call end stage, start to what you call return to sport, this is where nursing them through any apprehension that they've got, because they might be worried about, not so much about, I'm going to go and hurt myself again. It's they don't want to make the injury that they've got worse. If there's metal work or any repair gone on, and will it be okay? Will it be okay? But that, unknown to them, that process has started with me and with them from the first day that they walked in here, because the first thing we talk about is what we can do. And if all you've talked about is what you can't do, and you inadvertently create fear in them, then when you get to the end part of what we call return to sport, and what I would call taking some hits on it, then you will have a major problem trying to get over that hump. So I set myself and them up for success by only talking about what we can do as soon as they walk through the door. And I am constantly convincing them that there's nothing wrong with them, because that's the other problem as well, is this over focus on the injury makes you feel like you're sick and there's something wrong with you. Whereas if someone's got a rod in the femur, I'm like, well, you've got a bit of Wolverine going on now, it's not in the rest of you, you've got to just, it sounds really flaky, but it's the more shy and the more cautious you are, usually the worse it is. So by the time it gets to that, as I say, end stage return to sport, they've been doing so much already that they're ready to accept that and accept some hits and impacts. Any of the athletes that I've worked with, if you happen to speak to them, will say to you, it gets to that point where I want them to have a crash. Like the best thing for you to do right now is have a crash.
Well, I went on the way back from injury to kind of realise that it's still okay, kind of thing.
Dan's had a few offs in the park so far, and I'm like, that's the best thing for you, because
as long as it's not,
because you can fall down the stairs and break your arm, right? So it's how much cotton wool do you really want to wrap someone in? And that's not to say I'm completely cavalier with it and just let them run riot and do whatever they want to do, because you depending where they are on the continuum of returning to sport, you can make an injury worse, you can cause a problem. But there's some reasonably wide goalposts that you can move within, and it's different for every athlete. So every time an athlete comes and says, well, I was speaking to so-and-so that's done an ACL and I've done my ACL, I'm like, look, forget what anyone's done or however they've done it. Every injury for every athlete is completely individual. You might be back in 4 months or you might be back in 18 months. Who knows? And no matter how many times I've seen the same injury, I treat everyone like it's completely individual. So they get to the end point whenever they get to the end point. But it's you remove the emotion from it and you just make it about, can you do this, yes or no? Can you do that, yes or no? And again, there I am again, can you do? And just moving them on. But you can't, they're a peacock, you got to let them fly. So how can you do that? How do I, how I manage that is a real art and a balancing act. Because that's what they do. Yeah,
it's funny, isn't it? They're just a rare breed, I suppose, isn't it? Some of those guys that you have through your doors. One thing I was wanting to ask you about was this sort of modern technology that we're now using in our everyday lives, and how everything from smartphone apps and stuff all the way through to sort of real sort of cutting edge sports science. How much of that do you think is a massive opportunity, and then how much of it do you think is almost a bit of a danger in terms of sort of reading into those analytics too much, as opposed to sort of going by feel, which is so important in action sports?
So I'm about 1,000 years old, so I'm pretty old school. So it's in the book actually. I use when it comes to the technology and performance for the athletes, I use a handheld device which measures up to 3.5 meters called a tape measure. And then I use a tablet device to transfer that information, which is a board and a pen. So there's a huge amount of technology available, and that technology and the science that goes into it can be a good servant, but it's a terrible master. And just there isn't much that we can't measure on an athlete anymore. But just because we can doesn't mean we should. And my take on it is only measure something you can do something about. So if I can't do anything about it and I can't affect it, I don't measure it. And that really starts to narrow down what you do and don't take from athletes in terms of information. I also never take anything from an athlete without giving them something back. And what I mean by that is, anyone in mainstream sport listening to this may know what I'm talking about. You can take a whole raft of information from someone: how much they weigh, are they hydrated, their body composition, how they feel. Like, there's a million metrics that you can do. But what do you do with that information? How do you give it back to them there and then? Does it affect any decision making? So with an athlete, rather than doing some really scientific, complicated test, I'll try and make it as tactile, or I'll make it as tactile as possible. So really unfashionable things like single hop and sticks, triple hop and sticks. And they can see that happening, and there's a tape measure there, and I can show them what they did last time, and it brings it to life for them. It's not a number that's hidden inside a device that they're looking at and nodding, but don't really know what it means. You have to bring this to life for the athlete, and they have to be able to relate it to their sport. Again, I'm repeating myself. So doing some velocity-based training in a gym with a bar, it's just numbers for an athlete. And no matter me trying to explain it to them, it's not going to make it any easier, but making it tangible by saying, well, can you move the bike from here to here? Can you move yourself from here to here? Makes it tangible. There's technology available now, which 10 years ago needed 3 people with PhDs and 6 flight cases to use and cost thousands and thousands of pounds. And now it's an app. Yeah. And that's great. But again, you end up losing yourself in a bit of a hole of numbers. Like, what are we measuring and why? Can we affect it? Yes or no? If not, why are we even looking at it? And numbers don't give you context, and numbers don't give you stuff to do with how you feel and emotions, in as far as when you look at the cold, hard number, it doesn't tell you the how or why, it just tells you the what. And the how or why is often just as important. And that's where the human comes in. And for me, as far as I'm concerned, watching an athlete walk into the place and asking them how they are, I've not come across a machine that can do that yet. Mm-hmm. So watching an athlete slouch into the place or limping or anything, and you say, so how are you? And they say, yeah, I'm fine. It's like, well, you're slouching and you're actually limping, are you? And
your legs hanging off.
Yeah. You know, you don't like you've slept all night. You know, there's unfortunately, technology takes all the humanity out of it. And I think that's the bit that we're missing. And then obviously mobile devices, I say there's things available as apps now, which is staggering, but mobile devices, phones themselves they're a brilliant servant. And again, a terrible master because, you know, and we're all, or I think most people, including myself, guilty of, you know, too much screen time. And it's really, really, it's difficult because we're overwhelmed with information that we want to consume all the time, and it's not like a book or a newspaper. So you pick up a newspaper and it ends, right? You finish reading it, or you finish reading a book and you put it down. Well, there's none of that with scrolling, is there? You can just scroll for as long as you want, and there's no end to it. And of course, with some of the devices now, you can actually set limits for yourself, which is brilliant. But how many of us really do that?
And you can usually just override them as well.
And you just override them anyway.
It just tells you, oh, you spent an hour on Instagram today.
Just another 15 minutes. And that's where it's a terrible master. It's a great servant because it's a brilliant tool for me, you know, to get the phone out, film something an athlete's doing, show them straight away, play it back, load of other stuff. But then in the evenings, it's someone can contact you at any time. So I'll just read that message. I'll just check that email. I wonder what they're doing on Instagram. And then before you know it, you're lost in a K-hole of cat memes and for 2 hours, and what even happened. And I don't really know what the answer is to it. I don't know what the solution is to it. It does as much harm as it does good. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone. So it's where I feel sometimes that mobile devices are this generation's kind of cigarettes. We've all got them. We've all got access to them, and we're not there's no sort of education that goes with it or consequence. And it's only when you look at your screen time back at the week and you're like, Jesus.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
You know, how was I on the phone? How have I got 8 hours of screen time? What? Yeah. Wait, what? And it's scary.
I think it's interesting you say that about the interesting thing about you say about the cigarettes is funny, because I actually heard a quote, I think it was Bill Maher, the comedian, said the exact same thing, that the phone was our sort of generation cigarettes. But he's like, the cigarette companies only wanted your lungs. The tech companies want your souls. And it's like pretty true. And it's also interesting when you say the thing that makes it even more difficult, it's similar to cigarettes in that it's potentially unhealthy. Well, it is unhealthy. But the phone has this very good argument that is so valuable in other things. And it's basically trying to, how do you sort of differentiate the massive positives? Because the stuff that it does allow you to do is amazing. But then there's obviously this downside, and to try and sort of merge the two, it's just impossible to kind of like, it's impossible to take the good aspects from what you gain from a phone and whilst removing the negative ones. It's just an absolute minefield. Maybe my daughter's generation or the one after will sort of know what they're doing with it, because really, you know, it's only in the last 10 years, maybe 15 perhaps, that mobile devices as we know them are the way they are. Because, you know, when I was my daughter's age, there's no such thing as a mobile phone. And then when there was a thing called a mobile phone, it used to take you 20 minutes to text anyone, tap, 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 away. It wasn't that sort of thing. You know, it wasn't, and you know, so I, you know, as adults, as parents, as whatever, we're just as inexperienced with how to make the best use of it as our children are. And I think it'll take a couple of generations for them to figure out what to do. Again, you know, what's life like without my phone? It's not as bad as it used to be. I've got a lot better at putting it down and leaving it. I think it's very, very difficult for athletes, especially with a social media presence. And I think that social media presence can be really toxic at times for athletes. You know, I'm not speaking for any athlete in particular, but from what I see on the outside is, you know, we all love a keyboard warrior, don't we? And, you know, an athlete just has to blink or breathe. And a lot of people have got a lot of things to say about it in the comments. And social media is one of those really sort of idiosyncratic things where it's one of the few platforms, or maybe the only platform, where you've almost got this direct contact with the athlete and you can touch them, albeit digitally, directly. Whereas, you know, that wouldn't happen in any other scenario, in any other way. In a magazine, for example,
you know,
or DVD.
Exactly. So it's this really sort of odd situation which is on the one hand good, because you can reach out and touch someone that you're a fan of, but also it has that really negative effect, because we all type things maybe that would you say that to them in person? That's what I always think. And if you
and you can never convey tone as well on the text.
No, and it's a little bit like it's like when I say to people about road rage. Imagine if you take the cars away and two people are walking down a corridor and sort of almost walk into each other. If you equate, that's right, it's like the shouting and the screaming and everything, but that doesn't happen. People go, oh, excuse me, yeah, no worries, and everyone goes happily on the way. But in a car, that does not happen. And again, and I see that on social media. Were this in any other platform, the interactions would be a lot more different. And as I say, for the athletes, my overarching concern is their mental health from a social media presence and what cost that is or isn't, and having the discipline to which is a lot easier said than done, to turn off from certain things.
And I guess it's difficult as well, depending on, well, I'd say probably almost all of the action sport athletes you see, the social media is such a big part of what is essentially their job. So it's almost not an option for them to actually say, you know what, I'm going to switch off for a month. Absolutely. While I'm maybe either healthy or recovering from an injury. Because you could suddenly then have sponsors saying, well, you're not racing, so can you at least, can you post this? It's like, how do you do it? Do you just download the app to post or whatever and then delete it again? And I think another thing of it is, especially with injuries, which you must see these guys come in, be training, I'm sure they'll be on their phones, and then for them to be back home injured and then having to just constantly be barraged, like sort of all these clips of, I don't know, the rest of the team or whatever, a given race or on a trip, it must be really difficult to basically be back at home, having to watch everyone do it. I guess it can be motivating in some ways, but then it's such a fine line, really, isn't it?
I think, again, you know, not blowing smoke up my own arse, but I think it would be a lot more difficult for them, again, if they're in what I call a really traditional medical setup, where they're in a, you know, they're alone with someone with nothing for company but an anatomical poster and a rubber band and a Swiss ball. I think, you know, that just really makes that contrast even starker for them when they're watching their sport move on without them. But again, as I say, giving myself a pat on the back when they come here and there's a massive skate park 10 feet away and parkour and trampolines and airbag and resi with a foam pit, you know, it's that contrast isn't so stark and they're not that far away from their sport. So we actually use what the sport's doing as a guide for what we're doing, like, because it's not just a question of getting someone back to where they were, it's getting them back to where they need to be, because the sport, if they're out for 6 months or a year, the sport's moved on 6 months or a year. So it's something that we make use of as to what everyone else is up to, or what the sport is up to, I should say, who's landed what, who's doing what, who's looking at what. And we build that into the return to sport plan. So it's part of the plan. So it's not this thing that's escaping them off into the distance and they're just sort of treading water going, everyone's leaving me behind. Otherwise, that is what it would be. And it's something that I'm aware of, and it's something that we avoid. And as I say, that's how we use it in a positive way.
I think it's interesting you say that. And I suppose because so many action and adventure sports are so young, they're on that sort of, well, relatively young compared to, say, a traditional sport. Most of them are still on quite a steep progression curve. So it means you sometimes will get an athlete in who's maybe the top of, I don't know, the freestyle mountain bike world tour, and they then get injured. Maybe if it was, say, football or something, you're just trying to get them back to where they were. But if you want to get them back competitive, you have to get them back healthy and account for the next for the 6 months of the progression that the sport's just had in terms of the level, really. Yeah,
totally. And again, like I say, if this was more of a traditional medical model, I think that would be a problem. Again, this starts from, it doesn't even start from the day they walk in here, I should say. It starts from when they ring me up and say I'm face down at the side of a mountain somewhere, and I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. Someone's coming to get you. Yeah. You know, you'll be back. And we have to use the progression of the sport as part of the return to sport plan, because why wouldn't we? You know, it makes total sense. So again, you know, as you rightly say, with action sports and free sports is that the progression is very, very rapid, and, you know, who's landed what, where, when and why is all part of that. And whether they're a competitive athlete or not, and by that I mean someone that competes in a competition. There's not many action sports which are first past the post. Obviously, you've got motocross, the motorsports, downhill, cross country, things like that. But generally, the free sports are judged, and so there's always that element of theatrics and performance that you got to incorporate into return sport plan. But for the ones that don't compete, so the Danny McCaskills of this world, well, it's not that it's no more or less difficult, because he's got to be able to complete a project of footage of moving image, so which is its own competition in itself. So whether they compete or not makes no difference. It's getting them back to the level that they want to just slot straight back in, or as we say, better than that. You know, you've got to come back better than you were, otherwise what was the point?
Yeah, it's interesting one for sure. Like, it's just mental that with that, I'd say pretty much in every action sport I can think of, like the level when you just think, whenever you think it's like getting to a stage and you're like, right, surely it's gonna sort of plateau out a little bit. It just, someone will come
someone
along
always comes someone always comes in
it.
and throws something down. You're like, where did that even come from? And again, that's where facilities like this are so important, because at a reasonably early stage, we can try that stuff on the sprung floor, in the trampoline, in the airbag, in the foam pit, and it comes in what you would say pretty early, again, and otherwise it would be. I don't know what it would be. It would be, see a physio for 6 months and then off you go and sort of start trying to do it yourself again. I don't know, but that's why, as I say, these facilities are so important because you can bring that in really, really early.
Another thing I was going to ask you about, is partly because I've just recently read a book about it, is the sort of importance of sleep in performance recovery. And it's kind of ties in with, we were talking about mobile phone stuff, because I know I spend so much. Is that something you kind of advocate with athletes and stuff? Or is it just impossible to...
Sleep hygiene. So my take on that is, for the action sport athletes, is none of them are going to look back at the end of their career and go, do you remember that time we got an early night and had a good night's sleep? And that's kind of where it's at. And sleep's really important. And I would love it if action sport athletes got a solid 8 hours a night. The sort of person that's going to get an early night isn't the sort of person and personality that's going to throw themselves off a cliff either, is it? They're not really these really conservative, introverted, I'm going to go to bed at 7 o'clock with my warm cocoa. They're not that personality type. Yeah. So the answer to your question is, I would love anyone to get a good night's sleep. They're just not going to, though. And I mean, I've been and seen and been part of some absolute train crashes, and it's just not in them.
Is that something you've ever tried to do in terms of like the mobile phone?
Yeah.
Sort of tracking.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Obviously, with you guys working so remotely, is it just a case of
there isn't anything that I've not done, which is same as just punching myself in the dick. It's like, what did I even try and do that for? It was like, I've done it all. I've tried all of ultimately creative adults, which what action sport athletes are the children that survive. They've not had that creativity knocked out of them. And the more, and like any child, the more I try and put on or impose or direct or prescribe, the further away you're going to push them. So rather than do that, it's embrace that. And if they've, say, not been to bed that night, which happens, then I manage it in a way. I say, well, if you've not been to sleep tonight, really weird conversations with action sport athletes. Well, if you've not been to sleep tonight, then the next day, why don't you think about doing ABC, which is like what I would call an active recovery day. Yeah, fucking go to bed. More like an active recovery day. So, that big session you had planned, you were going to go and session this feature with whoever, it's does it have to be tomorrow? Could you do it another day? So I'm managing it in that way so it fits into their lifestyle. I think, anyone that works in action sports that thinks you're going to encourage them to have an early night, turn the phones off and, only drink the tears of newborn seal pups, it's just not going to happen. So what can I do? What can I do? How can I affect them? And it's a case of, well, if you're going to go out and you're not going to go to sleep, then why don't you think about this the next day? And why don't you think about this the day after? And so they can manage their weeks a little bit better. Yeah,
it's definitely an interesting one. And I suppose rest may be another example of that. Obviously not as extreme as sleep, but just trying to force, or again, not force, encourage.
No one's forcing an action sport athlete to do anything, Duncan.
People to at least rest.
Again, it's like I say, it's bringing it back to the sport. So if they're struggling to land a certain trick or get over a certain hump, then I will say, do you think maybe you need a bit of a rest? And why don't we revisit this in a day or 10? Yeah. And it has to come from the sport, and it has to come from that. It can't come from this parenting kind of, don't you think you should? Because, everybody knows better, right? And no one likes being told what to do. So if they're struggling in their sport, then that, and I think it's something to do with that, that's when it comes in. But it has to come from the sport.
You've got a book out?
I've got a book out. Oh, look, it just happens to be,
yeah.
oh, well, there's just like a copy of it there.
I'm going to take a copy away. I'll admit that I haven't read it other than...
Yeah, nice one, Duncan. Thanks a lot.
Well, I didn't get sent one. Well, you think you sent Danny one,
well,
but
I'm
it's just...
14th choice for this podcast. Thanks a lot.
Disappeared into the abyss. Explain a little bit about that and how it came about.
So it's a book that I'd threatened to write for a long time. And it's called Embrace the Chaos, because that is working with action sports, and it's aimed at anyone that wants to work in action sports. So it's not necessarily for athletes. If you're a coach or any sort of practitioner that's thinking of working in action sports, it's a little bit of a how-to guide and some heads up of what sort of things to look out for. So it's my philosophy, my principles, how I plan and program for action sports, things to watch out for. More importantly, though, it's got about half a dozen other coaches in there who I know, and it's got all their opinions on what training for action sports looks like. But even more importantly than that, there's 20 athletes are in there with their take on what training and preparation for their sport means to them. And they've each got different ideas. And really, that's the important part. It's not really like who cares what I think and who cares what anyone other coach thinks. It's like, what do the athletes think? Because we all too often don't ask the athlete, like, what do you want to do? What do you think? What do you think works? What does work for you? And their opinion's the only one that matters, really. And that's why that section's called The Only Opinion That Matters. And very, very fortunate that I've got the athletes that I've got to tap into for that information, who everyone's heard of. And some really, really interesting things that come out of it, some really interesting snippets. And then I tie it all up at the end with what I think the whole book means, and off you go. I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but
That's cool.
So
it's like a coffee table book, isn't it? So it's only available in physical.
Well, I had to
form,
make it look
like
pretty because I didn't really go to school, so that was my main
make
thing.
Up for some of the typos.
Even I even got Danny to put pen to paper, so
which is a miracle, to be fair.
It was, and on time, believe it or not.
No, that's an even bigger miracle. I'm looking at the title, Embrace the Chaos. You must have been tempted to call it Herding Cats at some point.
So it was called Herding Cats for quite a while. Yeah, it was. And anyone that's sort of come across my stuff before, as I always say, working with action sports is herding cats. It's actually herding cats blindfold with a loudspeaker. And there's a graph in there called the spectrum of herding cats, which sort of puts all the different branches of athletes where I think they sit on that spectrum, from really professional and diligent and can be left unattended to feral.
Without giving too much away, and if you get the book, you'll be able to see which the ones in the middle are. But what's on the left and what's on the right?
So the really let's do this. Let's just read it straight from the horse's mouth. So
I can't even think what it would be.
So at the far left, you've got things like MotoGP and Superbike and four-wheel rally, and I've got them down as well-behaved, diligent professionals, unlikely to do anything off script or to cause an alarm like fire alarms, and they can be left unattended. And then at the other end, you've got street skate and street BMX, which is completely feral and utterly inspiring. Can be found sessioning a feature for anything from an hour or 12 hours straight. You will only ever find them in their natural habitat, which is where they belong, in a good way. Try to see where
what's the middle?
So in the middle, so you've got mountain bike trials is more towards the feral end.
I thought we'd be
it says here they are their sport and their sport is them. Do not expect calls or messages to be answered or returned. They may go missing for days, weeks, or months at a time. There you go. But yeah, so it's all in the book. Good. But it's tongue in cheek, and it's supposed to be fun and funny, but it is some of the realities of working with action sports. And again, you've really just got to understand who's in front of you, and they are so. Street skaters are so brilliant at what they do because they skate in the street. Well, I don't want to see them in the gym. It's maybe come to a park and work on some stuff, but honestly, they are good for a reason, because you've not got people like me imposing on them or anything. And be some athletes do want to train. So some do want to do all the training, and I can be that person for them. But it's sounds really flaky, but just let them be, let them fly.
Literally. Sometimes. So where can you get the book? Amazon?
Yeah, just on Amazon.
Darren Roberts.
Just embrace the chaos. You know, it's the one with all the 5-star reviews, obviously. You can't miss it. But and my other goal with this book was for it to be burnt on the steps of universities and, you know, traditional based institutions as heresy. But it was really good to reflect on what I do and why I do it, and the why being more important than the what. And it just helped me reflect on my own practice. And it was great to get in touch with some of the athletes that I've not worked with for a little bit, and just the massive sort of diverse opinions between the athletes of what training means to them, which is, as I say, that's the most important thing, is what they think. And otherwise it's just a book of me saying how ace I am, and it's just me talking about me, right? Yeah. Even the coaches that are in there, you know, I don't agree with everything that they all say, but that's why it's in there. Otherwise it's just me in a massive echo chamber going, I'm fantastic, which I am, obviously. But it's just it's an opinion, isn't it? It's a body of opinion.
Now, if it's interesting you say that about the sort of university and stuff, which was one of the questions I did have, not necessarily about unis and careers, but was just basically if there was, for example, like a young person interested in going down your sort of career path in strength and conditioning and performance, what would be your advice to
buy the book, obviously, and there isn't anything. This isn't something that you can learn. It's just something. It's something that you acquire. And if you want to work in action sports with the athletes, is let go of your own map of the world, your own authority, and cede that to them, cede that to the athlete. The athlete's in charge. And as I always say, I work for the athlete, and, you know, which means they're in charge. I do whatever it's my job to put in place whatever it is they need to get them to where they want to be, which means I tell all the doctors and the physios, this is what we're going to do. It goes the opposite way. And I think let go of the fact that if only these athletes would just get a good night's sleep, if only they could, you know, clean 100 kilos or snatch 100 kilos, it might make them worse at their sport. It might make them not as good. So it's really letting go all the traditional paradigms and processes that we're married to in performance, and just opening your mind to something that's completely new, because action sports are one of the few things in the world that are actually exploring the limits of human performance, and doing things that haven't been done before.
Before we finish, it's probably going to be difficult to choose one without offending some other people. If you were to say, sort of look back at the last 10, 15 years of the athletes that you've worked with, and you had to choose either an individual or even like an individual's journey, say back from injury.
I never want to see again.
They never want to see again, or that you've actually like really thought, you know, you're just like fair play, like that was that's like been seriously impressed and inspired by like either the hard work or what they've had to go through to actually get back to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
you've seen a few fairly big journeys.
I've seen a few.
Doesn't need to be one either. If there's a couple you can.
I think. You know, you see some really terrible injuries, and, you know, I think closing my eyes and just letting my mind go straight to it. Dan Atherton with his broken neck, that was to watch him power through that. That was, you know, he's one of the toughest athletes I've ever worked with. You know, you usually find him in a digger, obviously, but building stuff that no one can ride. So he, you know, when he broke his neck years ago, which probably people don't remember or maybe even know about anymore, but that was watching him power through. That was and being with him on that journey was really inspiring and impressive. Katie Ormerod, she's as hard as nails. She's an absolute machine. She's had some really, really tough injuries in her time, and she watching someone at such a young age power through that as well. And she's an absolute professional athlete. She's also got a lot of the gym records as well, which I always remind people when they come in. I'm like, well, you're not as strong as Katie. So
and her injury came at the most brutal time. Which was just before the Olympics, wasn't it?
At the Olympics, unfortunately. But the thing that the common thread with them all though is, as much as they drive me mad and I've got no hair, I wouldn't work with any other group of athletes. There's no egos. There's no bad characters that you're having to manage. They're just they're all really inspiring to work with, and all the medical professionals that I use, they like working with them because it's something different, and they enjoy how personable and down to earth, and they're just something different for them to work with as well. And apart from worrying about where they are or what they're doing, and why the phone's been off for 3 days, but not for a good reason, they're not bad people. They're great to work with, lovely. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Nice one. Well, on that poignant moment, I think that's a good point to wrap it up. One last time, Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, embrace the chaos. You'll know exactly which one it is.
I'll put the link in the description.
No, thanks for having us. Thanks for. It's nice to be 14th off the bench. I like it.
Well, you make it if you're in a rugby team, you'll be starting lineup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll take that.
Nice one. Any social media? Where should they get you for your memes that have already been mentioned?
Yeah. So if you want to see a tsunami of memes aimed at everyone, including myself, it's Action Sports Solutions. I'm not on Twitter. No, I'm not on. I deleted Twitter.
You were pretty big on Twitter for a while.
I deleted it a couple of years ago for the reasons that we were talking about 10 minutes ago, which is, you get the FOMO. So I'm only on Instagram. You're not going to get any useful information about who's doing what, where, when, or why. It's memes and really obscure, abstract stuff that no one knows what's going on about. So,
well, that is some sell. So there you go. Action Sports Solutions on Insta. Check it out. Cheers, dude.
No worries.
That's been class. Thanks very much.